three speakers. We have Dr. Catherine, Dr. Steve, and also Dr. Ono. So I would like to begin the session with a question from Professor Associate Professor Tarmiji. So Professor Tarmiji, could you open your mic and ask live to Dr. Catherine, please?
Hi, everyone.
Hello, Professor Tarmiji. How are you?
Thank you for inviting me to join this amazing conference. Actually, my question goes to, I think, for all of the panels, is about the role of the virtual exhibition in the COVID-19 era. Because of the COVID-19 effect, everything has gone digital, including the virtual art exhibition that has emerging and trending in the field of art. But the issue is there any needs to create standard rule that must be followed by who want to organize the virtual exhibition, so that it does not become a mess in the art discipline. Thank you very much.
Professor Tarmizi, is the question for all the three presenters or specific?
Yeah.
Okay, so please, Dr. Catherine, Dr. Steve, and Dr. Ono to have a discussion about this question. Thank you. Who would like to go first?
I can. I love that. I love that question. So I think, I come from curatorial studies as well. And if I think about my own curatorial research inside my master's, there was very little conversation around what digital environments look like. Part of my shift into art education includes that digital for a really important reason. We are working in a fractured art community where we have post-internet artists without art training. We have post-digital artists with and without art training. And then we have some artists who are working in very specific site-based practices physical site-based practices that can open their audiences through virtual and digital exhibition spaces. But it does mean that just like in art education, where there's been a catalyst or shift into digital, we also need to do that in curatorial practice. We need to think about what the opportunities are for audience growth and development. We need to think beyond the physical white walls of galleries out into what digital collaborative, connective opportunities are. And that is a shift from digital to post-digital that I referred to in my presentation. And I think it's a really important one that we all must make together. If we understand that art is an ecology, that artists, art worlds, art students, art practitioners, writers, etc., all exist in response and relation to each other, our gallery spaces have got to shift and very quickly. What we saw in Australia during COVID, particularly in Melbourne, has been a rapid shift into digital exhibition. But the mistake they made was that they went out and got the digital artists rather than actually talking to the artists who are working in more traditional studio-based practices and asking them to digitize their work ready for exhibition. And that just shows that there's a misunderstanding, and that most of the art world is actually still pre-digital. It's reliant on big, heavy cultural sector that engages with a physical audience and gets its funding from physical spectators and audiences, rather than thinking more broadly about a global art community and developing global opportunities rather than physical walk through the door ticket sales. It'll actually democratize the sector if we do it well.
Okay, thank you. From Dr. Catherine, now can we move to Dr. Steve?
At my field. So I have no relevant expertise. However, a friend of mine, a colleague, is in digital humanities, and she arranged an exhibit on utopias, and it was mixed media. They did exactly what Catherine was talking about, digitizing different forms, the drawings, the artworks, and the letters. And they did it with a team approach. So they had several graduate students as well as faculty from the library who got together, and they all created this wonderful exhibit that was partially digital. This was pre-COVID, so it was also partially in person. Right now, the digital form is accessible in continuity, and there are songs, there are the journals and so forth. So they're digitizing different forms of media. And that's the extent of my influence. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Steve. Now, please, Dr. Ono, to answer the question from Professor Tarmizi.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Sorry, I cannot put up my virtual background because otherwise it will mask my face. Okay, thank you for the questions. I'm not an artist. My background is engineer. I am helping building the internet in Indonesia. So the mindset in the engineering from the internet or engineering point of view is very simple. We normally like to get consensus on things. So if I map this thing into the art world, what we are thinking is very simple. If you do a good work, then we acknowledge, we make consensus. This is a good ones. If that's okay, we can adopt that kind of thing. On the many platform on the internet like YouTube or media social, they have a capacity to flag a product or posting. If this is very very bad, we can put flag in these things. So this will turn down an art product. If it is not a good one, they will turn down a product from the platform. So it's very brutal, it's very cruel, but that's the reality on the internet. On the other hand, as Dr. Catherine said, it's very interesting. On the internet is not a one-way communication platform. Like if we have an exhibition, it's basically one way from the artist to the community. Internet is two-way communication platform, and Dr. Catherine already mentioned several times. This is a feedback loop between the community and the artist. So if we can use the internet, I would strongly suggest to maximize the feedback communication door or road between the community and the artist. That will create a much better product later. So we sometimes we see things, we normally digitizing things and put it on the internet, but internet have the other option to make feedback loop, communication between the community and the artist itself. We need to maximize those things. Otherwise, internet is only one way road. We need to make it into two ways, and we can maximize things. And the process for acknowledgement is much greater because distance is no longer it's exists, but we can reduce the distance by the internet. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Ono, for the answer. Okay, now we move to another question. This came from one of the audience for Dr. Coleman. The question is: do we in the same platform, example art for the well-being? Okay. I hope you get the questions, Dr. Coleman.
Okay, I'm unmute now. Sorry, I couldn't unmute myself. Can you ask me that question again? Sorry, it was about platforms and well-being. Is that right?
Yeah. So yeah, I think it's about the platform. Like maybe what you did in the art is also the same if you do it in for the well-being.
Yeah. So I think that well-being and belonging are two of the most important components of a digital environment. Digital environments enable us to connect to each other in ways that we might not physically be able to connect to each other more traditionally. So it's not about globalization. You can connect locally, and if we think about what the internet was for, and if we try and harness that we have an opportunity to think about how we can engage with people through ensuring that we have equity around distribution of knowledge, equity around distribution of wealth. Those equities actually come about by a respectful, trustful relationships. And those relationships can be built online. We don't need to build relationships in physical spaces. We can use mediators, and there's lots of different ways of using the internet and different digital and virtual environments as a mediator, something that sits between. So just like when we go out to dinner and there's a table and the physical site that's between us, if we start to think about what the internet and what digital environments serve as mediators, it allows us to rethink that. I think part of the problem we have is that we think that humans are different to non-human digital things. We think that humans are far more powerful than anything else, rather than thinking about the power of digital and virtual environments, the power of the internet, and actually maybe starting to flatten that a little bit. Not shifting the hierarchy, but flattening the hierarchy so that we can actually engage and use the mediation spaces to create meaningful relationships. That's what well-being is about. That's what our mental health is about. Meaningful relationships means that we connect, we collaborate. Somebody doesn't have power over or agency over us. One of the difficult things we need to teach in the digital space, though, is a literacy. The literacies and capabilities of understanding data trails are incredibly important. The kinds of data trails that we leave behind in digital spaces means that sometimes that mediator that we want to use as a place to gain power actually holds a lot of information about us. And we need to understand what data we leave behind in different forms of spaces that can harm our well-being. But it does mean that we need to we need to hold as much information as we can about the spaces that we're working in, and then try and engage with them, build them as safe places.
Okay, thank you. Interesting discussions. And I think next for the question is question for Pak. So for Pak Ono, it's also quite interesting. We begin with a question from Pak Ono. So this is about the colors. So we know that there are two types of color, RGB, red, green, and blue, and the pigment. We are now in the situation that pigment is disappeared. In screen, we only know RGB colors. What will happen? Are they live in the real world, or they think that they are the one color will dominate, and the other will like.
Wow. Oh, okay. I give up. I give up. Sorry. I give up. I am very much IT guy, so I give up. It's unfair. To be honest, if I answer, I will go to RGB, but I know I'm fair. Sorry. On this one, I give up.
No. How about if like now, like maybe in the future there will be like domination of like media from based on screen rather based on like printed media. Possibility of that.
Like what we are doing in IT world, we actually moving from screen into real world. Actually, if you understand 3D printing, we actually moving from screen to real world, and now we are moving to big 3D printing. Like we can print what boat, car, machineries. So it goes both ways actually, from word into screen, screen to 3D. So it works both way.
Like circular.
Yes, yes, exactly.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah, and it's a big business now. 3D printing is a big business now, because very easy for us to design anything. Like say we create a product, we just design it on screen and print it directly, and we have our own product that way. So the design, what you have in your faculty, design product department, yeah, should go to 3D printing, because that's the way to go.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Pak Ono. And next, the question from Arinafri from Sriwijaya University to Dr. Coleman. Art and art education are frequently spoken as creative and important aspects of cultural thinking, values, and problem solvers in schools and society. So, how to create and design a personalized learning space to practice art in this current virtual and digital learning pedagogy era due to the COVID-19 pandemic?
Well, we have a lot of opportunities, I think. For me, I think that, and I said this earlier when we were talking about, why I seized this opportunity. I think that sometimes there are moments in life when you realize that there's a change. And that change I have felt, at least during this moment in time, that COVID is a catalyst to think differently about what the possibilities are for art, education, for culture, for people, for language. There's been a return in people, at least in my country, and I think in this part of the global south, a return to thinking about community, a return to thinking about family, and what's important in that space. I don't know whether that's the case in the global north. I think it's a little different, but in our part of the world, I think that we have come to also understand our politics slightly differently through COVID. We've watched some of the very big issues politically and health-wise in the global north. And so art education then is positioned to rethink what we can do, the role that we play in supporting young people to understand who they are, in providing a platform to present who you are, to understand who you are. Art is made by us. It's our first language that we ever use before we even learn to speak the languages of the countries that we live in, the languages of our culture. And so dancing and drawing and performing, we need to understand as an embodiment. And if we can use those embodied practices to empower us as individuals, then that's what our job is for. And I think that this is the moment to seize that change and to realize that, that instead of arguing over things, which often happens in the art world, we argue over, who gets what and who has more grant money, and to actually create some connections with each other and rethink some opportunities into the future. What do we want our future to be? And who are those futures determined by? I think it's the artists that we need to ask the questions of. We need to be talking to the artists, and those artists need to be working in consultation then with others. What do the integrations between art and engineering hold? What do our what does removing the binary of art being somehow othered or less than or less important, how can we actually change that conversation and make sure that art is always central? When I go to school, I learn about art, and I don't learn about art from other places. I learn about art from where I'm from first. I don't when I'm living in Melbourne learn about art from Germany until I've learnt about the art of Australia, and I've learnt about the art of my Indigenous First Nation peoples, and then I start to engage in a broader conversation. They're the changes that I think that we need to see, and that is a pedagogical knowledge change. That means that instead of looking to others, we look to ourselves to understand things, and we're in a really great place to do that because the world has shrunk during COVID. We're kind of located in our spaces, we can't travel, and so it's a good time to look inwards and realize what it is that we have in our own space.
Okay, thank you. So, for next, we have a comment from Dr. Steve came from Gije. So Gije mentioned that seeing the Maori video, it can be guided as that every man should know four of his brother. In Sundanese, water, air, earth, and fire. But his girlfriend already exists because we cannot see students working to produce it. Okay, this only is from Dr. Steve. And I think now we came to the last questions for this section. It came from Ibu Asri, dekan from University of Indonesia. I want to ask to all of the honored speakers. I am from public health background. All of the presentation are wonderful. I am wondering how would art and technology would be used to make messages that would make people and children more internalized and comply to the health protocols during this COVID-19 pandemic era. So it's quite difficult, but yeah, it's real questions because we know we have to teach our children to behave properly during the this pandemic. Okay, so maybe who wants to go first?
I'll go ahead and go first on that. I sent a link because she typed it in the chat. There's a good article from last year from the Journal of Neuroscience about the storytelling brain. And it doesn't apply just to stories, but to the arts in general, that they're becoming more aware and more able to measure the impact of different art forms. And when there are things that are vivid and dynamic, it engages the attention. I mentioned Stanislas Dehaene and what he studied about the consciousness. So getting the attention, first of all, and then putting it in a way that is, well, in the case of COVID, you don't want something that's too frightening, and you don't want something that is too light. So finding that sweet Goldilocks zone in the middle and combining dynamic visuals along with the storytelling is going to trigger several centers in the brain at once, and that's going to make it more effective and make it last longer. And you want both of them. You'd have to find a different form for children and for adults, of course.
Okay, thank you. And maybe Dr. Catherine or Dr. Ono would like to answer.
Tough questions. Sorry. Okay.
Dr. Catherine is on mute again.
Unmute. Okay. I think I'm unmute. Okay. I've been involved in the community basically in Indonesia, and also I'm still jury on Satu Indonesia Award, and the idea is very simple. We need, like Dr. Steve mentioned, it's about storytelling. So what we actually doing, we need to grab the story from people among us and tell how things during COVID, how to survive during COVID, how to do things during COVID. Okay, in the Satu Indonesia Award, this year we provide 5 awards for COVID hero, and their story is amazing. One is ambulance driver, and she is the only ambulance driver in Indonesia right now, and she got this kind of award, and her story is very touching. And if you hear her story, then you will understand why you need to follow the protocol. And the other awardee is the story about how to survive during the COVID, how to do work from home, how to study from home. If you hear their story, there's also amazing. One of the story I received is from Bandung. The restaurant called Restu Mande. Restu Mande is Padang restaurant. During the first month of COVID, they goes to bankrupt, nearly bankrupt basically. They cannot get money, and how to survive is they move online, and in 1 month they make the same money as 1 year in conventional restaurant. So this kind of very interesting story. It can be relayed from one person to another person, and internet can be used for that. That's about the story. The other thing we can use is the two-way communication, either to WhatsApp group or any group. This kind of things can be used to convey this kind of story, hoping heard this story people they can then follow the protocol. Thank you.
Thank you. Interesting.
I
Interesting.
love that. Yep. And if you use the internet, that means the kids can actually design the advertisements. The kids can tell the stories. The kids can draw the pictures. You know, I think a participatory arts methodology is really important. Arts methodologies ensure that our pedagogies make change. So a participatory methodology means that artists go into schools, artists go to communities, and if that's via digital, then they create the advertisements. What does it look like when a kid makes a great little film about washing my hands, and that's the film the community sees? That makes art important, but it also says that children's knowledge is really important in understanding how I'm going to survive a pandemic, rather than somebody that's really distant from me and doesn't mean anything to me. And the way that kids speak and tell stories is the way that they listen to each other. I think this is why art is so important. Participatory methods that we use as collaborators, as artists, we also use as researchers. And so instead of looking outside, we just need to look to the way the artists work. Artists go and they find the right person to communicate. And then that communication is the message. It's really important to do that kind of work. Ask a 7-year-old what it means to survive a pandemic, and they'll draw it for you, and there's your advertisement already made for you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the interesting answers from the three speakers for this session. So I think that's all marked the end of the first session. But before we close the session, I would like to